Good morning, everybody, and welcome to IGTV. This is a production of New York City InfraGard. We have with us again today William H. Murray with the InfraGard Editorial, and we're going to be focusing in on authentication. All right, Bill, take it away.
This morning I'd like to talk about one of the most fundamental, rapidly changing, and exciting security mechanisms, authentication. Authentication can be defined as the collection and reconciliation of evidence that attests to something. In information security, it usually refers to the establishment of a claimed identity. That is, the reconciliation of user credentials to an expectation, usually a stored reference. In normal human commerce, authentication has involved the use of credentials, usually on paper, sometimes plastic, issued by some authority. Probably the first such credential was a statement from a notary. In Europe, in the Middle Ages, it was often a baptismal certificate issued by the parish church. In early rural America, it might have been something as simple as a contemporaneous entry in the family Bible. In modern society, the first such credential that we get is a certificate of live birth, or birth certificate, issued by the authority, usually the local health department, in the jurisdiction where we are born. It states the time and place of birth, the names of the parents, and the name of the infant. However, unless it has something, usually a tiny footprint, to bind it to the individual, it is really only evidence that someone of that name was born at that time and place. Possession of it could be evidence of identity, providing that the issuing authorities were not too free in issuing duplicates on request. I've been getting by on a duplicate most of my life. Since the early part of the 20th century, perhaps the credential most cherished by young people and most widely used for other purposes is the driver's license, usually issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state of residence. The license testifies to the name, address, and date of birth. It is bound to the owner by possession, a reference copy of a holographic signature, and usually a photograph. In almost every jurisdiction, the application must be accompanied by a birth certificate, evidence of residency, and other corroboration. Because of the care of the issuing authority to establish identity, and because the document has multiple mechanisms to resist forgery, it's widely accepted as proof of identity for purposes far beyond that for which it is issued. The next most popular credential is the credit or debit card. These are issued by banks to their customers as evidence of the bank's intention to pay for goods or services purchased by the customer. Note that these cards have features, including holograms and fine-grained backgrounds and images, that make them very expensive to counterfeit. However, most computers are blind to these features, and people who might recognize them rarely touch the card. The third is the passport, issued by nation-states to their citizens as evidence of their citizenship and to assist them in crossing borders. While these are very difficult to forge, the application and issuance process lacks discipline and uniformity and is vulnerable to fraud. As a consequence, their use is pretty much limited to the purpose for which they are issued. My DMV will not accept a passport as evidence of identity. Each of these documents attests to the bind between the individual's name and a different factor. The birth certificate and passport bind the name to the date and place of birth and the parents' names, the driver's license to the date of birth and the current address, the credit card to one's ability to pay. While the issuance of paper credentials is often weak, complementing one another, they can be fairly strong. Part of the strength comes from the fact that they are issued by different authorities. While one might dupe one authority, duping multiple authorities is much more difficult. Because until recently, computers have been poor at reading paper documents, and because many, not to say most, issuing authorities do not have their reference databases online, paper credentials are used mostly, prima facie, as evidence at application and enrollment time, rather than at use time. For 50 years, computers have relied upon, 1, a shared secret, such as a password or phrase, Up to a point, the more bits in the secret and the shorter the life, the more secure. However, there are limits. 2, a biometric, a physical characteristic like a fingerprint or a unique but reproducible behavior, such as the way one writes one's name or speaks. Or 3, possession of a token, such as a key, one-time password generator, like a secure ID token or a Vasco token, or a computer chip, for example, a smart card or a smartphone. Since like documents, all of these have limitations such as cost, inconvenience, replay, theft, loss, or forgery, it is often more secure and convenient to use them in combination. We speak of two-factor authentication, where two complementary kinds of evidence are used, or strong authentication, in which two or more kinds of evidence, at least one of which is resistant to replay, are used in combination. We resist replay with one-time passwords, either from a chip or distributed in real-time out of band. We may also resist with challenge response procedures, in which only a small part of a large shared secret is used in each logon. The security of an authentication scheme is both application and environment dependent. For example, for 40 years, the use of mag stripe card and PIN was secure for dispensing currency at ATMs. However, the rest of the world has abandoned mag stripe in favor of chips for payments at the point of sale, mostly because of replay attacks. The card issuers in the U.S. have been slow to move to EMV, the chip standard, in part because of cost, third-party payment processors, a problem specific to the U.S., and the fact that it does not address so-called card-not-present transactions over phone or internet. Nonetheless, Visa has promised to issue cards with EMV chips in the U.S. in 2012 and to provide incentives for third-party processors to convert to EMV-compliant point-of-sale devices. My favorite biometrics are the visage. Can you resist this face? And speech. These two biometrics have the advantage that they are easily reconciled by people. Indeed, infants can do it. Only recently have computers caught up to people in the speed and accuracy of recognizing these two biometrics. Not only can computers now authenticate us by comparing us to known reference, they can actually recognize our voices and faces using big data. They can do this while resisting replay, for example, distinguishing between a live face or voice and a photo or a recording. In any case, it is up to us, information security professionals, to choose a combination or combinations of these mechanisms to achieve the intended and acceptable level of risk for a specific application and environment. For this, among other things, are we called professionals and paid the big bucks. Our job is getting harder as the number of choices increases. For example, it is now clear that within months to years, everyone will carry a computer at most times. This computer will be small enough to carry, have an optical scanner, that is a camera, a microphone, a chip that resists cloning and also encryption. The computer will be persistently connected to every other computer in the world, often, not to say usually, by two physical networks, the cellular network and the wired network, but also by multiple, perhaps an infinite number of virtual networks. This offers us an opportunity for computer applications to authenticate their users at least as well as people can recognize one another. It offers the opportunity for authentication that is both error-tolerant and of arbitrarily high confidence. Still, by way of example, the internet and big data offer us the opportunity to authenticate late and with a minimum of prearrangement. Consider an e-commerce site that asks one to turn on one's camera, takes one's image and submits it to an internet service, receives in return a name, then asks one to hold one's credit card to the camera. Note that the face of the card is much more difficult to counterfeit than the mag stripe. Reading it on demand by a camera can also be much more resistant to replay. While the passport database is not available to the public online because it would leak, it could be. It could be possible for us to be able to submit to the passport authority a passport number, full name, and date of birth, and it would be very useful if all we got back was a yes or no in return for that. Similar services provided by authorities that issue birth certificates, social security cards, and driver's licenses would be very useful and inexpensive to provide. Note also that these mechanisms would give us most of the advantages of the national ID system so coveted by bureaucrats, but without the inevitable abuse. No error or bureaucrat would be able to deny anyone their civil rights, enable them to deny a citizen the right to work, or cause them to be unjustly arrested or imprisoned. Of course, it is for precisely this reason that we can expect the bureaucrats to resist it. Between a weak system in their control and a strong one with no central authority, they will attempt to use Congress to force the one in their control. Next to the bureaucrats, our professions, law enforcement and information assurance, will have the most influence over the policy choices made. This is one more chance for us to earn the right to be called professionals and be paid the big bucks. See you next week.
Thanks, Bill.